Chapter 26. Here we go. Well, when they was all gone, the king he asked Mary Jane how they was off for spare rooms, and she said that she had one spare room, which would do for Uncle William, and she'd give her own room to Uncle Harvey, which was a little bigger, and she would turn into the room with her sisters and sleep on a cot. And up garret was a little cubby with a pallet in it, and the king said the cubby would do for his valley, meaning me. So Mary Jane took us up, and she showed them their rooms, which was plain but nice. She said she'd have her frocks and a lot of other traps took out of her room, and said it was Uncle Harvey's way, but he said they weren't. The frocks was hung along the wall, and before them was a curtain made of calico that hung down to the floor. There was an old hair trunk in one corner and a guitar box in the other, and all sorts of little knickknacks and gimcracks around, the girls brisking up a room with. The king said it was all the more homely and more pleasanter for these fixings, and so don't disturb them. The duke's room was pretty small, but plenty good enough, and so was my cubby. Well, that night they had a big supper, and all of the men and women were there, and I stood behind the king and the duke's chairs and waited on them, and waited on the rest. Well, Mary Jane, she sat the head of the table, and Susan alongside of her said how bad the biscuits was, and how mean the preserves was, and how ornery and tough the fried chicken was, and all that kind of rot, the way women always do for force out of compliments. And all the people all knowed everything was tip-top, and so said, how do you get biscuits to brown so nice, and where for the land's sake did you get these amazing pickles? And all that kind of humbug talky talk, just the way people always does at supper, you know. And when it was all done, me and the hare lip had supper in the kitchen off of the leavings, whilst the others was helping clean up the things. The hare lip, she got to pumping me about England, and bless if I didn't think it was the ice just getting mighty thin sometimes, she says. Mind you, hare lip is one of the daughters, and this is the youngest daughter at this estate. Did you ever see the king? Who? William IV? Well, I bet I have. He goes to our church. I knowed he was dead years ago, but I never let on. So when I says he goes to our church, she says, what, regular? Yes, regular. His pew's right over the opposite arm, on t'other side of the pulpit. I thought he lived in London. Well, he does. Where would he live? But I thought you said you lived in Sheffield. I was in a stump. I had to let on to get choked with a chicken bone so that I could get time to think about how to get down again. And then I says, I mean, he goes to our church regular when he's in Sheffield. That's only in the summertime when he comes here to take the sea baths. Why, how you talk? Sheffield ain't on the sea. Well, who said it was? Why, you did. I didn't other. You did. I didn't. You did. I never said nothing of the kind. Well, what did you say then? Said he come to take the sea baths. That's what I said. Well then, how's he going to take the sea baths if he ain't on the sea? Looky here. I says, did you ever see any Congress water? Yes. Well, did you have to go to Congress to get it? Why, no. Well, neither does William IV have to go to the sea to get a sea bath. Pfft. Well, how does he get it then? Gets it the way people down there gets Congress water, in barrels. There in the palace of Sheffield, they've got furnaces, and he wants the water hot. They can't buy that amount of water off there at the sea. They haven't got no conveniences for it. Oh, I see now. You might have said that in the first place and saved time. When she said that, I see it was out of the woods again, so I was comfortable and glad. Next, she says, do you go to church too? Yes, regular. Where do you sit? Why, in our pew. Whose pew? Why, ourn, your Uncle Harvey's. His'n? What does he want with a pew? Wants it to sit in. What do you reckon he wanted with it? Why, I thought he'd be in the pulpit. Right him. I forgot he was a preacher. I see I was up a stump again, so I played another chicken bone and got another drink, and then I says, blame it. Do you suppose there ain't but one preacher to a church? Why, what do they want to do with more? What? To preach before a king? I never seen such a girl as you. They don't have no less than 17. 17? My land! Why, I wouldn't set out such a string as that, not if I never got to glory. It must take 'em a week. Shucks, they don't all of them preach the same day, only one of them. Well, then, what does the rest of them do? Well, nothing much. All around, pass a plate, and one thing or another, but mainly they don't do nothing. Well, then, what are they for? Why, they're for style. Don't you know nothing? Well, I don't want to know such foolishness as that. How is servants treated in England? Do they treat 'em better than we treat our? No, a servant ain't nobody there. They treat them worse than dogs. Don't they give 'em holidays the way we do, Christmas and New Year's week and 4th of July? Oh, just listen. A body could tell you ain't ever been to England by that. Why, Joanna, they never see a holiday from year's end to year's end. Never go to the circus, no theater, nor shows, nor nowheres. No church? No church. But you always went to church. Well, I was gone up again. I forgot I was the old man's servant. Next minute, I whirled around in a kind of explanation of how a valley was different from a convent servant and had to go to church whether I wanted to or not and sit with the family on account of its being law. But I didn't do it pretty good, and when I got done, I see she warn't satisfied. She says, "Honest Injun, how hain't you been telling me a lot of lies?" "Honest Injun," says I. "None of it all?" "None of it at all. Not a lie in it," says I. "Lay your hand on this book and say it," says I. Or excuse me, and I see it warn't nothing but a dictionary, so I laid my hand on it and said it. So then she looked a little better satisfied and says, "Well then, I believe some of it, but I hope to gracious I'll believe the rest." "What is it you won't believe, Joe?" says Mary Jane, stepping in with Susan behind her, the other two sisters. "It ain't right nor kind of you to talk so to him, and him a stranger so far from his people. How would you like to be treated so?" "That's always your way, Mame. Always sailing in to help somebody before they're hurt. I ain't done nothing to him. He told some stretchers, I reckon, and I said I wouldn't swallow it all, and that's every bit the grain I did say. I reckon he can stand a little thing like that, can he?" "I don't care whether 'twas little or 'twas big. He's here in our house and a stranger, and it wasn't good of you to say it. If you was in his place, it would make you feel ashamed, and so you oughtn't say anything to a person that will make them feel ashamed." "Why, Mame, he said—" "It don't make no difference what he said. That ain't the thing. The thing is for you to treat him kind, and not be saying things to make him remember he ain't in his own country and amongst his own folks." I says to myself, this is a girl that I'm letting that old reptile rob her of her money. Well, then Susan, she waltzed in, and if you'll believe me, she did give Harelip hark from the tomb. Says that to myself, and this is another one I'm letting him rob her of her money. So this is where you should understand that Huck is starting to be concerned with the fact that the Duke and the King, they've got this $6,000 that these girls have inherited, that they plan to take and distribute in an investment. But Huck is starting to struggle with that now that he's starting to get to know these girls. Then Mary Jane, she took another inning and went in sweet and lovely again, which was her way. But then she got done and there weren't hardly anything left of poor Harelip. So she just hollered. "All right then," says the other girls. "You just ask his pardon." Well, and she done it too. She done it beautiful. She done it so beautiful it was good to hear. And I wish I could tell her 1,000 lies so she could do it again. I says to myself, but this is another one that I'm letting her rob her of her money. And when she got through, they all just laid themselves out to make me feel at home and know that I was amongst friends. I felt so ornery and low down and mean, and I says to myself, my mind's made up. I'll have that money for them or bust. Here we see Huck Finn coming to another determination as far as what he's going to do to right a wrong. Do we think he's going to follow through with it? Do we think that he'll have a solid plan? Is that plan going to get him or Jim in trouble? Let's keep reading. So then I lit out for bed, and I said, meaning some time or another. When I got by myself, I went to thinking the thing over, and I says to myself, shall I go to that doctor private and blow on these frauds? Nah, that won't do. He might tell who told them, and then the king and the duke would make it warm for me. Shall I go private and tell Mary Jane? No, I dasn't do it. Her face would give 'em all a hint, sure. They've got the money, and they'd slide right out and get away with it. If she was to fetch in help, I'd get mixed up in the business, and before I was done with, I'd judge. Well, no, there ain't no good way but one. I gotta steal that money. Somehow. And I got to steal it some way that they won't suspicion that I done it. They've got a good thing here, and they ain't going to leave until they've played this family and this town for all they're worth. So I'll find a chance time enough. I'll steal it and hide it, and by and by, when I'm away down the river, I'll write a letter and tell Mary Jane where it's hid. But I better have it tonight, if I can, because the doctor maybe hasn't let up much, and he think as he lets on he has. He might scare them up out of here yet. The doctor is the one man in town that thinks that they're absolutely phony. So when I said in the previous slide on chapter 25, he's the one that said, girls, he's a total knockoff. These are not your uncles. Well, they didn't believe the doctor. So when they reference him, it's the one guy in town that doesn't seem to believe what these crooks are up to. So thinks I'll go and search them rooms. Upstairs, the hall was dark, but I found the Duke's room and started to paw around it with my hands, but I recollected it wouldn't be much to let the king or nobody else take care of that money but his own self. So then I went down to his room and begun to paw around there, but I see I couldn't do nothing without a candle, and I doesn't light one, of course. So I judged I'd get by to do the other thing, lay for them, and eavesdrop. Well, about that time, I hears their footsteps coming and going to skip under the bed, and I reached for it, but it wasn't there, and I thought it would be. But I touched a curtain that hid Mary Jane's frock, so I jumped in behind it and snuggled in amongst the gowns and stood there, perfectly still. Well, they come in and they shut the door, and the first thing the Duke done was get down and look under the bed. Then I was glad I hadn't found the bed when I wanted it. Whew! And yet, it's kind of natural to hide under a bed when you're up to anything private. He sits down, and then the king says, "Well, what is it? And cut it middling short, 'cause it's better for us to be down here a whooping up in the morning, up here giving them a chance to talk us over." "Well, this is it, Cap. It ain't easy. I ain't comfortable. That doctor lays on my mind. I wanted to know your plans. I got a notion, and I think it's a sound one." "Well, what is it, Duke?" "Yeah, we better glide out of this before 3 in the morning and clip it down the river with what we've got, especially seeing as we got it so easy. Given back to us? Flung at our heads, as you may say, but of course we're allowed to have to sail it back. Well, I'm for knocking off and lighting out." Ooh, that made me feel pretty bad. And about an hour or two ago, it would have been different, but now it made me feel bad and disappointed. And the king rips out and says, "What? And not sell out the rest of the property? March off like a passel of fools and leave $8,000 or $9,000 worth of property behind, laying around, just suffering to be scooped in? And all good saleable stuff, too." Now the Duke, he grumbled and said the bag of gold was enough, and he didn't want to go any deeper. Didn't want to rob a lot of orphans of everything they had. "Why, how you talk," says the king. "We shan't rob them of nothing but just this money. The people that buys the property is the sufferers, because as soon as it's found out that we didn't own it, which won't be long after we slid, the sale won't be valid, and it'll all go back to the estate. These your orphans will get their house back again, and that's enough for them. They're young and spry and can easy earn a living. They ain't going to suffer. Why, just think. There's thousands and thousands that ain't nigh so well off. Bless you, they ain't got nothing to complain of." Well, the king, he talked him blind, so at least he give in, and all right. But he believed he was blame foolishness to stay, and that the doctor hanging over them. But the king says, "Cuss the doctor. What do we care for him? Hain't we got all the fools in our town on our side, and ain't that big enough majority in any town?" So they got ready to go downstairs again. The Duke says, "I don't think we put that money in a good place." That cheered me up. I'd begun to think I weren't going to get a hint of no kind to help me. The king says, "Why?" "Because Mary Jane will be coming in morning from this out, and first that does up the rooms will get to order the box of these duds up and put them away, and you reckon I can run across money and not borrow some of it?" "Your head's level again, Duke," says the king, and he comes a-fumbling under the curtain 2 or 3 foot from where I was. Well, I stuck tight to the wall and kept mighty still, though quivery, and I wondered what them fellows would say if they catched me, and I try to think what I'd better do if they catch me. But the king, he got the bag before I could think no more about half a thought, and then he never suspicioned I was around. They took and shoved the bag through a rip in the straw tick that was under the feather bed and crammed it in a foot or two amongst the straw, and said it was all right now, because only makes up the feather bed. It won't turn over the straw tick only about twice a year, so it warn't in no danger of getting stole now. But I knowed better. I had it out there before I was halfway downstairs. I groped along to my cubby, and I hid there until I could get a chance to do better. I just had better hide it outside the house somewheres, because if they missed it, they would give the house a good ransacking. I knowed that very well. And I turned it in, with my clothes all on, but I couldn't go on to sleep. If I'd wanted to, I was in such a sweat to get through the business. By and by, I heard the king and the duke come up, so I rolled off my pallet and laid with my chin at the top of the ladder and waited to see if anything was going to happen. But nothing did. So I held on till late sounds had quit and early ones hadn't begun yet, and then I slipped down the ladder. So Huck has successfully taken this bag of gold away from the duke and the king, and now we just got to figure out what he's going to do next. Is Huck doing the right thing? We shall see. See you guys in the next video for chapter 27.